I found out the secret of the weirdest man in my hometown. It was worse than I could have imagined. He turned up around 6 months ago. It was us students who noticed him first, since every day he'd walk past the town's high school at around the same time. The kids would be out in the yard, playing basketball and gossiping, would stop what they were doing to watch him stroll by. He never looked at us, but by God did we make a game out of looking at him. What got everyone was how he dressed. He didn't show a speck of skin. His entire body was covered with some piece of clothing. It looked like a kid who'd gotten into their parents' closet. Everything he wore was mismatched and tattered. Usually it'd be a long, brown duster coat, tartan slacks, and a horribly stained shirt. Occasionally he'd throw in a scarf or a hat, or maybe a second coat under the duster. He wore gloves, sometimes leather, sometimes silk, and a tweed mask. His mask was hard to explain. It wrapped around his head perfectly with no visible seams or eye holes. We didn't know whether he could see or not, but he never had any trouble walking or crossing the road. I think it's the mask that really got people's imagination wearing. Some of the kids guessed he might have a rare skin disease. Others thought that he might have been a worker at the old chemical plant and was badly burned when the factory burned down, but that would have made him at least 90 years old. A bunch of older kids spread the rumor that he was some sick serial killer laying low in our sleepy town, covering his face in case someone recognizes him from a wanted poster or breaking news bulletin. Everyone liked to propound from the sidelines, but no one had the guts to actually find out. Not until tonight. It was the 26th of October. School had just ended for a week-long break, and I was going to my first real party. I barely knew the guy whose house it was at, but I leapt at the chance of underage drinking. The night turned out great. We all had fun and managed to not throw up once. I downed a whole packet of apple-flavored chewing gum to try and mask the smell of alcohol on my breath from my parents, although I had a feeling they'd be able to tell anyway. Me and 3 close friends left the party just before 11 and set off staggering home. We passed my friend Luke's house first. As he walked up to his front door, a light came on and his mother stepped out, her face contorted with pure anger. We laughed at Luke and stumbled on our way as he realized he mixed up the dates and forgot to tell his parents he was going out tonight. Me, Shane, and Rowan kept messing around as we navigated our way back home. Shane's house was next, and since I lived so far out, I was planning on having a sleepover at Rowan's. We turned a corner, still laughing from a joke we made a block ago, and saw someone. All 3 of us crouched behind the fence, peeping out from behind to confirm our suspicions. Walking down the middle of the road was the masked man. He was in his usual get-up, only he'd taken off his gloves. We all squinted to try and get a better look. The only light we had came from a pathetic, constantly buzzing street lamp, but we were desperate to finally see what he's been hiding. All of a sudden he turned and began walking up to a house. He stepped up onto the porch and opened the door. Just as he walked inside, we could see him slowly take off his mask, and then the door slammed shut behind him. The 3 of us looked at each other, all thinking the same thing. The mystery of what the masked man looked like was still that a mystery. He had his back to us, and even in perfect daylight we wouldn't have been able to make his face out. The first one of us to commit our thoughts to speech was Shane. He told us, pumping out his chest, that he was going to go see which of the rumors was true. He said he had a plan, and before me or Rowan could say anything, Shane was already halfway across the street. We looked at each other and followed him, coming up to the masked man's old house. It was noticeably more run down than the other houses on the block. The paint was peeling, the gutter had almost fallen down, and an upstairs window had been shattered. The 3 of us stood around the front door, keeping our voices low as Shane explained his grand plan. He said he was going to simply knock on the front door. When the masked man answered, He'd say, "Oh sorry, wrong house," and then just turn around and leave, but not before getting a good eyeful of him. We all thought that it was a flawless plan and egged him on as we took our hiding place behind a bush at the end of the masked man's property. As I got a good look at the house, I realized that I recognized it. My dad had this friend who had gone through a rough divorce. He slept in our spare room for a few weeks before he eventually won the house back in the court settlement. Around 6 months ago, he moved out of town without so much as a goodbye. I could remember when I was much younger him showing his car off to me. That thing was his pride and joy. I couldn't believe this was the same house. My thoughts were bisected by the sound of Shane rapping his knuckles on the front door. He turned to look at us and gave us a dumb grin and a thumbs up. I think he was about to crack a joke when the door opened. Standing at the entrance was the masked man. He'd taken off his mask, as well as most of his clothes. That much I could make out, as he was still shrouded in shadows. There wasn't a single light on in his house, and to me and Rowan he wasn't anything more than a silhouette. As we both tried to discreetly get a better look, Shane began stuttering out his excuse. Suddenly, he stopped. There was a pause before he began to scream in a shrill pitch. We watched as the masked man grabbed Shane by his lower jaw and violently yanked him inside the house, the door slamming shut behind him. Me and Rowan looked on in shock. I turned to Rowan to ask him what we should do, but before I could speak he was up and running to the front door. He started pounding on it and yelling expletives. I ran up behind him and yanked him away. I held him and asked if he was crazy. As he began mumbling a response, the front door began to open. We both bolted like a greyhound out of a trap and dived behind the corner of the house. We stayed there, holding our breath and waiting to meet the same fate as Shane. Eventually, Rowan found enough courage to peep around the edge of the wall. He didn't see anyone. He moved out a little further and saw that the door was still closed. I pulled him back and told him that we should call the police. He snorted and explained to me that they'd probably arrest us for underage drinking. We'd spend the night in some jail cell, and by the time we could explain ourselves, Shane would be dead. Before I could question his reasoning, Rowan walked over to a window, cupped his hands, and peeked in. I sighed, frustrated, and asked if he saw anything. He was replying with a long, drawn-out no when suddenly he yelped and crouched down. Seeing his reaction, I instinctively did the same. I crawled over to him and in a voice just below a whisper I asked him what he'd seen. I could see the fear in his eyes as he told me that saw the masked man, now mostly derobed, walking out from what he guessed was a door to the basement. After that, Rowan started muttering to himself about how the masked man must have seen him. I knew that Shane, my best friend for as long as I could remember, was in the basement. My stomach churned thinking about what I had to do next. I held my breath as I stood and peered in through the window. I couldn't see the masked man anywhere. I nudged the window and my suspicions were confirmed. Like the front door, the window was left unlocked and slightly ajar. I tried to steady my breath as I pulled the window all the way open. Rowan looked at me in shock as I asked him to give me a leg up. Still, he complied. Once I was inside, I pulled him in after me. Before I did, he grabbed a fist-sized rock from the garden. For self-defense, he told me. The house was perfectly still. Every surface was covered in a thin veneer of dust. We both stood there for a second, trying to hear the masked man. There wasn't a sound, other than the faint dripping of some faraway faucet. In what we thought was relative safety, we crept our way to the door the masked man had emerged from. I gently opened it and sure enough, I was met with a staircase descending into the impenetrable darkness of the basement. I didn't dare call out Shane's name in fear that he wouldn't be the only one who'd hear me. Instead, I began my way down the stairs, Rowan following right behind me. My mother had given me a small wind-up torch, so I could make my way home safely at night, she said. I fished around in my coat pocket for it, my hand clutching the familiar metal. Just as I reached the bottom, I found the button and switched it on, finally illuminating the room. It took me a while to realize what I was seeing, but judging from Rowan's deafening scream, he knew right away. Shane was hanging upside down from the ceiling, a chain hook driven through both of his ankles. He had long, fresh cuts across his throat, wrists, and legs, which were all pouring with blood. The blood dripped down into a series of angled metal sheeting, which directed the flow into a steel trough. There were 4 other bodies hanging from chains, all serving the same purpose. Some looked like they'd been there for weeks. We both turned and ran. As we scrambled back up the stairs, my torch beam fell on the figure standing motionless in the doorway. We slowly stepped back down the stairs until we were at the bottom again. We froze, watching for any sign of movement. Suddenly, the figure began to lift slowly off the ground. In an instant, it shot down the stairs, flying through the air like it had been thrown. I dived out of the way, but Rowan wasn't as lucky. The thing piled into him and pinned him to the ground. As I got to my feet, I saw it run its black, claw-like fingernails across his neck. I screamed and the masked man turned to look at me. It lifted itself to its feet and lunged. I grabbed the rusted hook dangling from the chain above me and swung it. It plowed into the front of the thing's head, caving it in. It went limp. The momentum from swinging the hook almost made me fall backwards into the trough of blood. I steadied my footing and dropped down next to Rowan. He lay motionless. There was a gaping wound along the side of his neck, and he didn't so much as gurgle. I knew there was nothing I could do. With tears streaking down my cheeks, I turned and began to somberly make my way up the flight of stairs. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move. I turned to look and saw the masked man yank the rusted claw out of its head and stand. It straightened itself and turned to meet my gaze. I ran frantically up the remaining steps. I could hear the thing let out an animalistic screech as it flew through the air behind me. I burst out of the basement and into the living room, making a clear dash for the front door. The masked man threw itself into me, sending me spiraling. I landed on a glass coffee table, which shattered from the force. I lay in pain on a bed of broken glass as the creature that had killed my friends loomed. It dropped down on top of me and lowered its face agonizingly close to mine. It was now that I finally got a good look at what it looked like under the mask. The thing's face looked like a naked mole rat, bleached white with chemicals. Its eyes were a mess of tumors and scar tissue, filled with a black-purple pus festering in the sockets. The soft tissue of its nose and ears looked partially digested. The gums were black and oozing a mephitic ichor lined with fragments of toothpits. Its front 2 cuspids, however, looked perfectly maintained and began protruding even further out. They now looked longer than my index finger and as sharp as razor wire. I shoved a shard of glass deep into the thing's neck. It pierced clean through to the vertebrae, embedding itself. Black, tar-like blood began to ooze, then spurt violently out of the wound. The masked man fell backwards, writhing around on the floor in pain. I staggered to my feet, limping to the front door before breaking into a half-sprint. Afraid it would come after me, I ran straight to the next-door neighbor. I began pounding in their door until I saw a light come on upstairs. I heard movement in the house and the door opened. Blinking the sleep out of his eyes and wearing a lime green bathrobe was Gary, my Sunday school teacher. He recognized me instantly and brought me into the safety of his home when he saw that I was drenched in blood. He laid a plastic sheet on a couch and told me to sit while he made tea. I sat and tried to catch my breath. I was still reeling from the night's events. Still, I felt safe in Gary's front room. It smelt like my grandma's house. I took out my phone and with a shaking finger tried to ring my mother. The kettle boiled and Gary poured my tea. He walked in from the kitchen, handed me the mug and sat down next to me. We called the police and I spent the next few minutes trying to explain to him what had happened. Once I had, he seemed to go into shock. He just sat there, bound by my words. Eventually he snapped out of it and slowly turned to look at me. He told me that I could go clean up in his downstairs bathroom and I realized the state I must be in. He showed me to the bathroom and left me to wash myself. It felt good to scrub the faded grime from my skin. I tried to avoid looking at myself in the mirror. I was drying my face with a hand towel when I heard a knocking at Gary's front door. I assumed it was either my mother or the police and, evidently, so did Gary. The next thing I heard was his scream, followed by the door being thrown open. His screams were cut short and replaced with the bestial growl coming from what could only be the masked man. I turned to the bathroom door and frantically fumbled with the key, locking it. I dropped to the floor and curled up in a ball under the sink as I began to sob quietly to myself. I heard labored footsteps coming from the hallway. Within seconds, they were just outside the door. A low scratching noise came, followed by a thunderous pounding as the masked man tried desperately to break down the door. Its hinges rattled as wood began to splinter. The midsection buckled and split. I could hear the wailing of sirens as police cars neared as the masked man's hand crept from the hole in the door. It felt around for the lock as pus leaked from the soft flesh and exposed nerves surrounding its black-purple fingernails. I could hear vehicles pulling up outside as I watched it hook its talons around the key. It ripped it, and the rest of the door handle, from the wood, sending splinters flying around the room. A group of police officers made their way through the front door. One swore to God when he saw what was left of Gary. The bathroom door fell to the side. The masked man stood in the hallway, staring into my soul and priming its teeth, which began protruding even further from its gums. There was a deafening gunfire and I clasped my hands around my ears, screaming as I watched the masked man get shot maybe half a dozen times. It staggered back, then dropped to all fours as the police opened fire again. It climbed up the wall and began crawling upside down along the ceiling. 3 officers gave chase as one barged his way past the broken bathroom door and took my hand, leading me out of the house. I saw my mother's car parked amongst the police cars. She stood next to it, crying as 2 officers tried to console her. She saw me and ran over, wrapping me in her arms. The police kept me a little while longer to take a witness statement. Eventually, my mother convinced them to let me come home with her. They agreed, took our address and told us that they'd call around tomorrow morning to talk further. I climbed into the back of my mother's car as she began to drive. She was silent, letting me rest as we neared our home. Soon, the rows of houses were replaced with trees. I watched them go by as I felt when people drifting off to sleep. I saw my first thing I can remember that night was seeing a white blur. It's not something that leaves your mind, just even when you try to fill it up with good things instead. It happened at an arcade. Dad had brought me to show some retro game he used to play with his cousins. I was winning, about to set a high score when I heard the screams. They were blood-curdling. I looked at my dad. My heart had dropped somewhere into my stomach. He was pale, he was as scared as I was. We knew what those screams could mean. We saw every morning on the news a new face, someone who had turned and killed or someone who had been killed by a vamp. Dad didn't wait to see who it was. He grabbed my shoulders and guided me straight to the exit. I shouldn't have looked back. When I did, I saw a picture that branded itself into my brain forever. The kid was cute, blonde with big blue eyes. Little overalls. He was clamping his teeth into his young mother's breast, sucking furiously as she shrieked in pain. The nursing cloth that used to provide privacy was now spattered with blood and lay idle on the floor. It's something I noticed as Dad rushed me out. I don't know what happened to the mother. All I knew was that she would never see her baby again. Not after the cops showed and took it to rehab. Everybody knows once you try human blood you can't ever stop. It's why young mothers are warned to stop breastfeeding as soon as the babies develop teeth. Dad said it was rare for this to happen, that it was likely she already had a scab or a small cut and the baby had bitten after the initial taste. He gave a small seminar about her stupidity, not paying attention like that. I thought that it was pointless to criticize her. Her baby was gone. She had learned her lesson, and so had I. I would never breastfeed in my life. I was paranoid for a long time. I refused to floss despite knowing it was impossible to turn with my own blood. I wouldn't share chapstick or kitchen utensils. I lived in constant anxiety and fear. Then one night, my worst nightmare came to reality. I was walking home when I saw a man rapidly approaching from across the street. His mouth and chin were covered in dark blood. Fresh. I froze in fear. I couldn't move a muscle. Something clicked when I saw he was wielding a small knife, tipped with blood. I can't die. Not like this. I ran, with energy and speed I hadn't thought possible. While running I tried to think of what to do, how to protect myself. I scanned the area in front of me and located a trash can on the corner of the street. Litter surrounded the bottom. I saw the top of a glass bottle peeking out of the top. I ran as fast as I could toward the trash. When I arrived at the bin, I speedily grabbed the bottle out, scanning it first for traces of blood due to years of paranoid habit. I closed my eyes when I crashed the bottle down on the curb, creating a makeshift knife. I did all this in the 10 seconds it took for him to reach me. I didn't let him make the first move. I was aware it was my life or his. I aimed for his throat, my heart pounding in my ears. I screamed when I stabbed him. I was still screaming as blood gushed out of his neck. He tried to stop the blood with his hands, clutching the hole in his neck. In doing so he dropped his knife, which clattered onto the road. He faltered, gasping for air. After I stabbed him I wanted to run. I mentally commanded my body to move as he bled out. But I was frozen. He looked at me with desperation and despair in his eyes. Even in my intense fear, for a moment I felt pity for him. Then, with the speed of a striking snake, his hand left his bleeding wound and he grabbed my hair. He pulled so hard I yelled in pain. When I did, he stuck his fingers in my mouth. I couldn't process what had just happened before I felt it. The most amazing feeling. It was like every worry was melted away. I was calm, floating up and up and up till I went from happy to ecstatic to a place where I felt like I was dreaming. This happened in 20 seconds, but it felt like time had frozen. When I came to, the man was lying on the street. Blood was still oozing out, but the animation had left his eyes. He was smiling. I knew why. He had chosen to do a noble thing in death. He had opened my eyes. Something I had been running from my whole life was something I should have been chasing. I now couldn't imagine life without another taste, as many as I could get. I knew I needed to run before anyone saw me and the cops came and took me away. But I had to take some with me. I took off my jacket and saturated a sleeve in the blood coming from his neck. As I did, I made sure that the sleeve didn't touch the road. I was gonna drink every drop, and who knows what germs could be on the street. I wrapped the sleeve with the rest of the jacket and ran in the direction of my home, holding tightly to my newfound treasure. As I ran, I wanted so badly to try another drop, but I knew I would black out and didn't know for how long. As I gasped deep breaths of the chilly autumn air, it registered. I killed someone. I shook the thought out of my head. It was self-defense, and I had a whole new life now. When I got home, I squeezed all I could from the sleeve and stored it best I could manage. Life has been somewhat surreal since then. Every day is stretched out endlessly now. I'm timeless. The blood is going bad. Soon I'll run out. It doesn't matter. I'm free. I'll live eons and days. I'm timeless. We have a pest problem. A big pest problem. My mother and I had always had a strained relationship. My father was never really in the picture, so we made the best of our situation. She herself was also often gone, as she was a state fire department pilot who also conducted search and rescue. One of the few women in her department. She did the best she could for me, but there were times when she would be gone for long periods of time, leaving me with my grandparents or aunt. When we were together, she put in her best effort. We would go on trips or outings. As I got older, however, I wanted to be more independent. She may have noticed me slowly slipping away. I can tell it bothered her. Through high school, she would always make it a point to ask me tons of questions: where I was going, who I was with, how long I would be. She would freak out if I were even a half hour late coming home. As kids usually do, I came to resent it, with accusations often being followed up with arguments. Then, the snooping began in my late teen years as I was preparing to go to college. One day, she found a glass pipe that I had left out on my nightstand. Normally, I keep it in my sock drawer, but I must have left it out and she saw it. This of course led to more questions: who gave it to me, what was I using it for, etc. Even at that time, I didn't really smoke anything unless any friends offered it. A friend had just given it to me. She was really starting to get on my nerves, so I bought a lock for my door. She didn't say anything about it or ask me to remove it, just scoffed. This is when things started to get really weird. One night, I was awakened by some strange noises coming from the attic right above my room. I laid there in bed just listening to it, trying to figure out what it could be. I'm not sure for how long. It seemed to be a mix of scratching and banging, like some animal was running around on the roof. After a while, it stopped. I figured it was probably just a cat that was killing a bird or something on the roof. At the time, I wasn't really alarmed by it, so I dozed off to bed. The next day, when I got back home, I unlocked my door, and to my surprise, my room looked like it had been rummaged through. My socks and underwear were scattered about, drawers were left opened, even my secret stash of Oreos and Cheez-Its had been compromised. I confronted my mom. "Mom, what the hell?" "What?" She looked genuinely puzzled, looking out from her laptop while on the sofa. "My room." "What about your room?" "You went through my stuff again." "What? And you took my Oreos and Cheez-Its?" "I don't even like Cheez-Its." "How did you get in my room?" "I didn't go into your room. How could I?" "The door was locked." "Well, evidently, someone had to." "My room is torn apart." "What?" I showed her my room. She had a look on her face. It must have been her, I thought. Then after a pause, she answered with a ton of uncertainty. "I have no idea what might have caused this." She started looking around the room diligently. She checked the closet, under the bed, behind the drawers. She was looking for something, it seemed. Then she noticed it. Right above my door, the vent cover had looked like it came loose. The screws seemed like they were pushed out. "It's probably raccoons then." "Raccoons, around here?" "Yes," she replied. "I've read about them. They're smart buggers." They can get into people's homes from under the house or through the attic and damage and destroy property. I was about to protest, but then I remembered the sounds. Actually, I did hear something last night. Sounded like there was something moving around in the attic. Let's take a look. With that, I grabbed a flashlight and we headed to the attic. We didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Whatever it was, it's gone now, my mom said, browsing around. I'll call animal control and see if they can set some traps. I screwed the vent cover back in and thought nothing more of it. A couple of nights later, as I lay awake at night in my own thoughts, I started hearing the noises again. This time, it sounded like it was coming from in the wall. It sounded like scratching in the ventilation system. Something was moving around in there. The raccoon must have come back. I looked up at the vent and there it was. Two bright eyes staring back at me. The raccoon? I was no animal expert, but whatever it wasn't a raccoon. It stared back at me for some time, then in a flash disappeared. I got up quickly, grabbed a chair from the kitchen, the flashlight from the hall closet, and tried to peek into the vent. I looked at an angle. I grabbed a screwdriver and undid the vent again. I placed it on my TV stand, stepped back up on the chair and poked a part of my face in. In hindsight, probably not the best idea. There it was again. Our eyes caught again and just as quickly it vanished behind the bend. I was freaked out enough to then go find some plywood from the garage and drill it in over the vent. My mom heard me and got up to see what I was doing. That thing is back. That thing? What thing? The raccoon or whatever. Didn't you call animal control? Oh shit, that's right. No, I forgot. I'll call them tomorrow morning. Mom, I don't think it's a raccoon. What is it then? I don't know, but whatever it is, it's not a raccoon. Either that or some other scavenging animal. I'm sure it's more afraid of you than you are of it. I didn't feel like getting into another argument with her. I just shrugged it off and told her I was going back to bed. I found it hard to fall asleep that night though. I must have laid there in my bed for a couple of hours until I just moved to the living room couch. The next day when I came home, my mom told me that animal control came by. They said that they didn't see anything but did set traps. This didn't make me feel comforted, but the noise stopped for a while after that. Still, I kept the makeshift vent cover on, and it was lucky I did. About a week and a half later, I woke up to a more aggressive noise. I looked up and saw that something was trying to push through the vent cover. I grabbed the flashlight that I then kept on my nightstand and kept it aimed at the vent. Knocking, 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 until finally it fell to the floor, and there they were again, those two big yellow glowing eyes. We again locked gaze for a while. The head came closer. I could make out his head, a bulbous head with what looked like long ears. I slowly got out of bed and came closer. It ran off again. I tried to look in. This time, I ran into the hallway, pulled the release for the attic entrance, took a deep breath and climbed the ladder. In hindsight, I should have taken something hard. I reached to the top, pulled myself in and looked around. There was only enough room to crouch in this attic. It was just a wooden platform floating on a sea of insulation with the fuse box for the heating unit. Then, there standing at the far end of the attic on a beam, was a dark figure. I shined my light on it and there stood a gremlin. It was a Gollum-esque figure, possibly 2.5 feet tall, more nimble and human-like than a primate. It had dark fur, possibly black or dark brown, and long pointy ears. Those large cat-like eyes glared at me again, and it made a groaning noise almost like a purr. I stood there in a mixture of confusion and terror. My heart racing, my mind racing through all the various things this creature could be to make sense of it. The gremlin jumped to the next beam towards me. It stopped, but it kept its gaze on me. I stepped back, keeping my light on it. It again jumped to the next beam. I backed away slowly towards the ladder. I put one foot down on the first step, keeping my balance. It suddenly darted to the left. I booked it down the ladder, clenching my flashlight. I pancaked and missed a step. I slipped and fell down, landing on my side. The wind was knocked out of me a little. I pushed myself back up as hard as I could and took a second, but there was another thud behind me. Whatever it was had dropped right behind me. I ran for the door. Hey, what are you doing? My mom called to me. She was just sitting casually on the couch with a single lamplight on, reading. I turned around, but there was nothing there. I looked back at her. She could tell the expression of terror on my face. I saw it. I saw what was in the attic. Really? What? Was it a raccoon? No, it was like a little monkey bat thing. Wait, we have bats in the attic? EY. No! It wasn't a bat, it was way bigger. Like an evil-looking lemur. We don't have lemurs here. I'm not saying it was. It was. I don't know. Okay, I'm sure it's just some animal that just found its way back in, she reassured but uncertain. But hey, sit down, I want to talk to you. I came over to the couch and sat down, still looking towards the dark hallway. Listen, she began. I'm sorry for snooping around and being nosy. You're getting older and you deserve a little space and privacy. It's just, I feel like I've missed so much with work and everything. I tried to do the best I could and... Hey look, you're not a bad mom. I interrupted. It's not like I'm out there gangbanging or anything. Hell, I barely have a social life as it is. I know you're a good kid. But I'll always worry about you no matter what. I'll back off, but I want you to remember that you can talk to me. We talked a little more for a while before she went to bed. I brayed going back up into the attic for one last look, but didn't see anything. Maybe my mom was right. Maybe I was letting my anxiety get the best of me and it was just some large bat. Must have been a strong one though to push off the vent cover like that. I slept again on the couch that night. The next day, my mom told me that they had caught a very large raccoon in one of the traps, but that animal control had already came by to take care of it. Wish I would have been able to take a look at it. The nightly commotions had all but stopped after that. This wasn't the end of it though. About a few months later, I remember getting up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. I saw my mom's light was still on and her door was a little opened. She sounded like she was talking to someone. I peered through the door and there in my mom's room was the gremlin. Sit! She commanded, and the gremlin Saturday she tossed it a treat. Good boy! It pounced on her dresser drawer and looked to be aiming at one of her vents. No, we're not doing that again, she scolded it. We're done with that. You can go outside. She opened her window and the gremlin then pounced over to the windowsill. I turned its head and locked its eyes with me again before jumping out into the night. Time has stopped at Vienna International Airport. I mean, the title is rather self-explanatory. I'm at Vienna International Airport, and everything is frozen in time. All the morning passengers are here, all of them unmoving like fleshy, warm statues. Looking outside through the window, I see a flight departing, suspended in the air. Next to me, a woman is dropping her handbag, and all the contents are frozen in the air, unaffected by gravity's pull. Suppose I can elaborate a bit, as, at the moment, it appears that I have all the time in the world. I was on a business trip in Vienna, and I had to travel back to Paris CDG Airport with an early morning flight. On the way towards the terminal, staring out of the cab, I saw the airport lights in the dim, cloudy dawn sky. Some of the departing planes were awfully slow, almost like they were not moving at all. I was thinking of pointing this out to the cabbie, but I chalked it up to tiredness. See, after conference networking cocktails and 6 a.m. flights are not a great combination, so I was far from being in a chatty mood. Either way, the guy dropped me off, and I decided to have a quick ciggy before checking in. While smoking, I wondered about airports, how fascinating they are. A while ago, during my university years, I had a part-time bartender job at one, and I always found them eerie. They were liminal spaces, areas of the in-between, people just heading there to pass through it, sort of a border world. Of course, seeing airports like that could have been Stockholm Syndrome caused by this student job as well. After all, I needed some sense of wonder to tolerate 5 shifts. And now, many years later, here I am, at 5 again, but this time, as one of the travelers, a wandering soul lost in the liminal landscape. I let out a brief laugh. The hangover left me way too philosophical. Yet, the eerie feeling I had turned out to be more of a premonition, rather than a hungover inner monologue ramble. Things took a sharp turn for the weird at security. While there were quite a few people, many gates were open, so the crowd moved fast. I got directed towards a freshly opened security station. It was surrounded by tired-looking officers. One instructing me to put my laptops and fluid containers on separate trays, the other two standing behind the metal detector gate, waving me through, and a third one slightly peculiar. He was sitting behind the monitor of the X-ray machine you put your bags through, wearing huge aviators, basically covering half his face. Oh well, I figured you gotta make a fashion statement somehow, even if you're obligated to wear a uniform. Anyways, I was about to walk through the gate, the metal detector, the symbolic border between the mundane and the liminal. But the very moment I stepped through it, complete silence engulfed everything. I reflectively touched my ear, thinking my earbuds somehow turned on noise canceling, when I realized that they were in the tray, which slowly rolled down on the pickup area. And that was the only thing moving. Everything else stopped, like someone hitting a pause button. Odd, I figured. I slowly walked back through the gate, but nothing changed. Everything around me stood still. The security guy's hand frozen in a bored wave, a man putting his belt back on unmoving next to me, a family in the other queue, stuck in mid-argument, their small kid, her face trapped in a mid-crying expression, but no sound leaving her mouth. Wish I could do this to kids once the plane took off. Nevertheless, temporal anomalies be damned, I did not want to miss my plane, so I grabbed my stuff from the tray. Yet, as I was putting my laptop back into my bag, I saw one thing, or, well, the absence of it. The security guy with the sunglasses was nowhere to be found. This whole thing did not look like something that respects airport security standards. Walking towards my gate, D24, in the dead silence was certainly an experience. I moved through crowds in suspended animation, or I sure as hell I hope it was that it would be rather awkward to be at an airport full of dead people. Still, it had a certain beauty. Upon arriving to D24, an unusual sight welcomed me. The monitors showed that boarding was open, and indeed, the doors were ajar, but the flight destination, instead of Paris CDG, just looked like a jumbled mess of characters. Now, while my app said that this was the correct gate, I did not want to end up at the wrong location, so I decided on not boarding for now, waiting it out instead, hoping that a staff member or an announcement will clear up the confusion soon. I was a bit hungry, and the nearby bar seemed, albeit overpriced, but fairly attractive. I walked over, crisscrossing the statue like crowds. I grabbed a sandwich, and, as the staff was unavailable on account of being frozen in time, I decided to walk behind the till to the coffee machine and help myself to some drinks. For a moment I entertained the thought of making myself a nice flat white, but I figured that if time restarts and I am standing in a restricted area steaming milk, I may get some angry looks, so I opted for an espresso instead. The tiny cup was halfway through when I heard something familiar, the breaking news announcement of Euronews on a nearby TV screen. Well, something apart from me was unaffected by this timefuckery, so I quickly grabbed my coffee and my sandwich. The total was €12.30, so I put a tenner on the counter and figured they can keep the change. Indeed, at the back of the bar, there was a TV, broadcasting the morning news, oblivious to the frozen world around it. Chief investigator of the crash of Air France flight **************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************** just in case, at Vienna Schwechat International Airport this morning states that at this time, the exact cause of the accident cannot be determined. While the number of confirmed casualties just passed 80, the search for survivors continues. According to witness testimonies, the aircraft overran the runway during takeoff and crashed into the industrial area of Schwadorf, a settlement near the airport. Authorities have asked the public to forward any information, including recordings of the events, to the authorities. Rather macabre, watching these news at an airport, I was thinking, when it hit me like a freight train, or like a crashing plane, the flight they were talking about was the one I was supposed to board. Now, while I was trying to cut down on my smoking, this news warranted another cigarette. The airport has a nice smoking area, looking at the runway, where a flight was taking off, except it wasn't, as it was just floating silently, in a surreal manner. Some sight for a smoke. Yet, as I was clicking my lighter, I noticed something weird. Well, something that should have not been weird, but in this specific scenario, it was rather unusual. A few airport technician-looking guys, in high-visibility vests, cargo pants, and despite the cloudy early morning, dark aviator sunglasses, were walking around. You know, actually walking while the world around them was dead still. I'm back now at the restaurant, typing this down on my laptop. Now, I know that my demeanor may feel like I'm not taking the situation seriously enough, but trust me, this is my defense mechanism when I am positively shitting myself, which is pretty much the case now. I mean, I'm not stupid. I saw the news of my crashed plane, and I can connect the dots. I'm wondering if this is limbo, death, or some otherworldly shit. But the call of nature is disrupting my spiral into anxiety. After the coffee and the ciggy, I'm not only about to shit myself figuratively, but also literally, so I will try to hunt down a bathroom in this hellscape of an airport. I'll check back in a bit to see if anyone's around, and update y'all. Cheerio. Update 1. So I went to answer the call of nature. Luckily, one out of the 4 stalls was open at least. I was also not jealous of the poor bastards whom eternity found in the middle of dropping a log. So, I was doing my business when I noticed feet. First I could see shadows under the stall door, through the gap, then 2 pairs of work shoes, 2 people walking around in the bathroom. Now, I was about to call out, but something held me back, on top of how awkward it is to have a mid-shit conversation. Soon I realized what set my alarms off. I saw the feet, but I did not hear them. They were walking in complete silence until they started talking. I mean, I reckon they were talking, but I couldn't understand shit. Saying their words were garbled is an understatement. It sounded like a recording of an already foreign language being played backwards, while distorted via a radio. So I clenched my buttocks and remained silent until they left. I was not against the idea of trying to communicate with whatever these lads were, but the situation was not exactly ideal, so I decided to delay. Instead of immediately heading back towards the bar near my gate where I've left my luggage and my laptop, I wandered around a little bit, as my plane was not about to leave. Upon inspecting the motionless terminal, I found some of the guys I've seen earlier on the runway and in the toilet. Contrasting how everything was halted around them, they stood out being busybodies, but they were always behind locked doors, on different floors, or otherwise inaccessible territories, in parts that you would normally not notice while wandering around an airport. Forgive me for sounding like a broken record with the whole liminal spaces thing, but this was another aspect of that. When you're at a place like this, a place of transition, there are so many little nooks and crannies you just look straight through. At an airport, you move with purpose, everyone moves with purpose, so these areas escape your attention. Now, it was the contrary, in an uncanny way. Noon moved with purpose, noon moved, period, except in these hidden places, which highlighted them, making me feel like I'm seeing things I shouldn't be seeing. However, this was not reciprocated. See, I was not particularly hiding, yet none of the employees appeared to react to me in any way. It looked like I had two options: reenact the movie Terminal except in this ghost airport, or just take my chances to get noticed, so I chose the latter. I started waving at them through the windows of locked doors and shouting at them from floors below, yet they all remained unfazed. Pretty fucking rude, honestly. Or at least, this was the case until I got back to my spot. Then things escalated. Returning to the bar where I left my laptop and bags, I could see three of these airport security-looking guys, carefully circling my luggage, discussing it in their garbled radio language. However, upon my arrival, unlike the other airport staff, this trio noticed me, and they made it painfully obvious that they did. As soon as I approached, they turned towards me in perfect unison. Now, I know that leaving your bags unattended like that is a big no-no at airports, and in a normal situation, I wouldn't have done so, but it's rather clear that this was far from what could be considered normal. I hoped that they would agree, so I apologetically explained to them that I was just heading to the pisser for a little bit. My excuse did not seem to convince them. The two dudes on the side kept staring at me through their oversized sunglasses unmoving, while the third one began to walk towards me with seemingly malicious intent. I attempted to defuse the situation diplomatically, but seeing how he steadily moved his hand towards a black, taser-looking device holstered on his belt, I concluded that my charisma will not save me today. So I resorted to the next best alternative: violence. I know full well that my following reaction was not a rational, well-adjusted one. Assaulting airport staff is a fine way to get banned from flying for life after all, but let me explain. See, in my late teenage years, I had a short stint as an employee at a shoddy nightclub. Some of my experiences there irreversibly altered my fight or flight instinct into punch first, ask questions later. And believe me, I felt threatened enough to have my reflexes take over. So anyways, I swung at the bastard. Admittedly, I am not in my best shape, definitely not after last night, so I was somewhat surprised seeing him collapse like a sack of flour as soon as my knuckles connected to his face, sending his earpiece, cap, and glasses flying. I was somewhat even more surprised seeing the other two guards immediately dematerialize in the same moment. Just gone, in a blink. I began to suspect that these guys were not your usual, bored, underpaid, caffeine-addicted airport staff, but something more sinister. Soon enough, my suspicion became certainty. The less lucky one of these entities? I whacked Lade in front of me, face down. To see the damage I may have caused, and to check his pulse just in case, I grabbed his shoulders and turned him on his back, so he faced towards me. Now, remember I said these guys looked like normal airport employees? Well, there was a little bit of a difference. The guy had like a million eyes. The face, previously covered by the dark-tinted lenses, which now lay shattered on the floor, stared at me with countless pupils. Small ones, big ones, just dotted all over the sockets, in a way that should not be possible. Not entirely unlike a spider, but way more crowded. In fact, there were simply too many of them. They should have not fit the space normally only occupied by 2 eyes, yet there they were, kind of like a Mandelbrot fractal. They appeared to be almost infinite and, frankly, fairly hypnotic. But I had to snap out of it. For the lack of anything better to do, I figured I'd sit down and type this update. I have mixed feelings about the situation. On the one hand, I'm somewhat relieved that I didn't ruin the day of some poor bastard at the airport. AMD parallelly didn't ruin my chances of me flying ever again, but in the meantime, I am a tad perplexed by what could be the consequences for KOING, a timeless, slightly eldritch entity. On top of that, I can't really get those eyes out of my mind, and not in a romantic way. See, no pun intended. I honestly don't know for how long I was staring into them, but once I was out of it, I felt like I remembered something. I'm not too sure what yet, but I think I'll take another smoke break to try and figure it out. Here's hoping that my pal won't go anywhere. I'll get back to y'all soon. Update 2. Midway through my ciggy, I realized that the unconscious guy may have a way of entering those little hidden areas I was ranting about beforehand. Since at this point I was fairly certain that the areas accessible for passengers won't hold any answers, I figured I could borrow a keycard. Spare me from the moral lesson of looting from a, hopefully only, unconscious entity. Of course, these security gates also require a password in addition to the keycard, but since apart from the trio messing with my luggage, no one acknowledged my existence, it was not particularly difficult to follow one of these mysterious walkers towards an off-limits area and peek at the 4 digits password over their shoulders. The key code was, I shit you not, 4444. Airport security my ass. I opened the security door and entered a bland, white, blindingly lit hallway. Leading the passenger area, with its soothing colors, kitschy decorations, and fake plants, and entering a blindingly lit, barren security hallway. Surprisingly, it didn't give me as much of a whiplash as I expected it would. Of course, this corridor had none of the artificially welcoming atmosphere of the traveler's lounge, but it still felt like that the 2 areas were related. I can already hear your snarky comments saying yes, both are parts of the airport, dumbass, but it's not that. It felt like the empty corridor represented the reality of this place, and outside of it, all the bits and bobs that made it feel welcoming were just there to ease people in a sense of familiarity instead of liminality. But here, behind the thick blue doors, that poorly fitting facade was dropped. No siree, no comfy feelings, colorful advertisements, and €2 massage chairs here for you, the corridor screamed, through the humming of the bright white neon lights, that you're a stranger, and you shouldn't be here. Too bad I got used to people screaming at me not to do things, then doing them anyways, and corridors, I guess? Kinda ruined that metaphor here. So I marched on, peering into barren office rooms, some of them containing some oblivious airport entities, their real self hidden behind their sunglasses. After a bit of wandering, I noticed an area labeled monitoring room, and on a whim, I entered. The label didn't lie. There sure were some monitors in there. Like, a lot of monitors, way too many for it to fit a room of this size. They weirdly reminded me of the jumbled mess of eyes the entity I knocked out. And, as this thought entered my mind and I remembered staring into those eyes, the smorgasbord of screens suddenly started to make sense, and I began to see security camera footage steadily shifting through all of them. At first glance, they appeared to be normal security feeds, but upon closer inspection, I noticed some increasingly unusual things at each one I looked at. The first anomaly I noticed was an image depicting the frozen scenery at the departure gates, including the big board listing all the flights, flight numbers, and destinations. Except apparently the 1300 Aeroflot flight was scheduled to leave to Pulkovo Airport, Leningrad. On another screen, the corridor with unmoving people had big billboards behind them, one of them proudly displaying a vaguely familiar, elderly guy, who, despite looking 80+, still had a fabulous pompadour haircut, and next to it, with big bold letters, The King 90 Elvis Live, at Ernst Happel Stadion, Vienna, January 8th. On another, every sign and advertisement was written in German. I am in Austria, but still, the complete lack of English was unusual in an international airport. In addition, airport security was wearing uncomfortably sharp uniforms with red armbands. As I looked closer in a corner of the screen, I had to do a double take, as a sizable portrait of a certain mustached failed artist and piece of shit was there on full display. Each screen I looked at showed this airport, but subtly or less subtly altered. I was witnessing different realities from a nondescript nerve center. After a certain point, I found the security footage of the little bar I left my stuff at earlier. And I noticed something pretty upsetting, and bear in mind, after seeing a long dead dictator's painting on a wall, the bar to upset me was placed pretty fucking high. See, you remember that TV I've seen the news report of the plane crash of my flight. I could kind of make out through the security screens that it was still broadcasting about the accident. The issue is, the broadcast was the same in all the alternative realities, no matter how many screens I was looking at. Apparently there are some worlds where Elvis survives or where the USSR still stands, but it appears that my fucking plane overshoots the runway and blows up in each one. Bit of a bummer, really. I snapped out of staring at the screen thanks to the beep of a walkie-talkie laid down on the table next to the screens. The sound was followed by a conversation of the airport staff in their unusual incomprehensible language until it stopped being incomprehensible. As I started to focus on it, just like on the creature's eyes, and later on the screens, I simply realized that I understood what they were saying. I'll try my best to translate. Execution error for Cornerstone event number 4778 due to passenger/victim manifest incomplete. Please advise, Handler A out. Handler A, we may have an update on your situation. Analytics department confirmed the identity of the interloper. Missing Cornerstone event manifest parameters are at value match with interloper, Handler B out. You know those moments when two people are shit-talking a third one, not knowing that said third person is within clear earshot of them? The whole stitch began to feel like that. I mean, I'm pretty sure that you figured out who they refer to as interloper the same time as I did, yours truly. Now, as the subject of the conversation, I felt that I was warranted to contribute. So I pressed the button on the radio, and, to the best of my ability, I tried to speak in their language and mimic their expert talking style. Handler A, Handler B, this is interloper reporting. Please advise on how to assist in resolving issue with Cornerstone event parameters. Interloper out. A bit of inconvenient silence followed. I had a feeling that someone was about to be fired. Roger that, interloper. Please stand by until HQ is instructed. More silence. This is Handler A to HQ, initiate Cornerstone event rollback. Active Handler Group, this is HQ. Please confirm rollback request. I was wondering if they were aware that I can hear all this shit. Handler A, confirming. Handler B, confirming. Active Handler Group, this is HQ, Air France Flight XXXX, of course, my goddamn flight, return to Cornerstone event launch position. Awaiting parameter correction. Finally, they got back to me. Interloper, this is Handler B, do you copy? Interloper, come in. Loud and clear, Handler B, I responded, fighting back the urge to wish him good luck in his future job hunt. Interloper, Please return to the initial spatial coordinates of departure from your host timeline. Once your spatial coordinates are approved, your temporal coordinates will be reset. Please continue routine to ensure Cornerstone event success. Right, great. So I go back to the security gate where this whole mess started. My good friend handler B resets time, I board my flight, then crash and die, and ensure that the Cornerstone event is done in my timeline. Wouldn't that be a right, heroic sacrifice? Roger that, interloper, will comply. I said. Hell fucking no, I thought. I'm typing this note just in front of that ominous security gate that froze time the moment I passed it. If I understand the handler correctly, the moment I pass it again, time will restart. One way to find out. See you on the other side. Final update. Okay, so it worked. I'm typing away from the same bar I was sitting at, except now everything is in motion again. All is well now. Well, almost all. As soon as I passed through the gate and everything suddenly reanimated, I began to feel a bit nauseous. Was it the fact that after hours spent in a frozen, soundless, and timeless world, suddenly the hustle and bustle of reality returned? Or was it because I was still hungover as hell, and it didn't occur to me that I could have nicked a paracetamol while time stood still? Dunno. But I needed to shake it off and get the closest thing I could to a cold shower, a thorough face wash. Except, as I was drying my mug, staring at myself in the bathroom mirror, the eyes of my mirror image started to blur and proliferate. Who knows, maybe soon I will have to invest in some large dark aviators. I can also catch some unusual changes in the corner of my eyes. Is that a poster of Elvis over here? That sign that was in English just a moment ago, is it now written in Cyrillic? But apart from these minor inconveniences, most things seem to be okay. So, am I about to board a crashing plane? Nah, as you may have figured that I am not great in following instructions. As soon as I was back, I set my VPN up and sent a couple of anonymous emails to airport security, to the police, to Air France, letting them know that something is off with that flight. I see that it is delayed now, and they are replacing the craft, citing technical issues. If I'm actually losing it, and imagined the whole thing, I probably ruined the day of my fellow travelers. But if not, then I just helped those poor bastards to live to see another day. But about the implications of me doing that, well. So, all sunshine and rainbows, right, I ought to pat myself on the back. I fucked around with beings beyond time and prevented a major accident. Yeah, normally I would, but there are some subtle things going on that overshadow my urge to celebrate. See, the eerie sunglasses wearing part of the crew is still around, and they definitely look a bit more agitated than before. And while I couldn't really catch all their conversations, here and there I hear some jumbled radio fragments I still understand. They mention a certain Cornerstone correction protocol and enhanced intensity events in close proximity. Now, what does that mean in practice? Hell if I know. But, and I know I am being pretty vague here, it sounds like shit is about to go down. Well, either way, they're calling my flight. Suppose it is time for me to leave this godforsaken airport.